Well, you've asked me to come along and talk to you about eating disorders, and I'm actually going to restrict my presentation to anorexia nervosa, which is obviously one kind of the so-called eating disorders. The word eating disorders is a serious misnomer, very confounding. One will never understand the nature of any of these disorders if one thinks of them as primarily eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa, that is especially so. There is, of course, profound eating disorder in anorexia nervosa, but it is entirely secondary in terms of psychopathology to concerns about weight and shape. So anorexia nervosa is, in fact, in the shorthand, a phobic avoidance of normal adult body weight and attendant shape. And if you can make that journey with me conceptually, we can begin to try to understand something about the nature of the condition, which might have some credibility. Anorexia nervosa is a condition because it is ego-syntonic. Now, will you allow me a bit of psychiatric jargon, you see? You all know about ego and syntonic. It actually means that the condition is consistent with how the individual sees themselves as needing to be, as distinct from ego-dystonic. Most of us would construe cancer, if we had it, as ego-dystonic. But we construe anorexia nervosa as ego-syntonic. The natural history of the disorder, as our predecessors recognized, was one in which they saw this starving, emaciated female, Morton described her, Gull described her, Lassalle described her, amidst the welter of emaciated young people, as was the case with debilitating diseases of the time. And they saw certain things that characterized her. They noticed that not only did she have amenorrhea, but it was a real hallmark, something that seemed to have started very early on in the saga of her weight loss. They noticed that it was a woman. Anorexia nervosa is not specific to females, but 97% of cases are female. Now that's most extraordinary. We'll all agree that there are no other disorders that have such a skew, except those that are specific organically to the genitalia. I mean, that invites reflection. And then they noticed that the individuals with the condition were bland. Concepts of hysteria were rampant at the time with Charcot and others, and they labelled it hysterical. Here was someone who wasn't complaining, just lying there trying to keep out of the limelight and weighing 5 stones, or in Paris 36 kilograms. And then they noticed the other thing, and it was very naughty of Gull to call it anorexia nervosa, because he was the chap who did, because he noticed this. Anorexia is, after all, absence of appetite. They noticed that there was a resistance to eating, but actually an intense fascination with food and seemingly great hunger, which was nevertheless resisted in many of the cases. And that notion, well, the physicians then of 120 years ago said, well, this all seems very psychological. The word hysteria was bandied around, which is a much undervalued concept and often used derogatorily. And they said, this must be psychological, it must be psychiatric. So the psychiatrists picked it up and ran with it. And of course, as you know, as psychiatrists, we only have 2 kinds of disorders, neuroses and psychoses. So everybody settled down and said, well, if it's psychiatric, it must be one of these. Anorectics are filled with despair eventually. I mean, they run out, because I'm going to be suggesting to you that it is not only an abortion of development, a derailing at the age of 12 or 17 or whatever, but actually a regression, a reversal of that growth characteristic, which is puberty, which they have experienced as ego-dystonic. Okay? I mean, the therapeutic task in anorexia nervosa is to render puberty ego-syntonic. I mean, after all, puberty is not something we ask for. You know, it's like pregnancy. Once you're pregnant, unless you abort, you're on. You can't escape the outcome. It's all part of that growth thing. You might quite like being a child, and then along comes puberty, and puberty demands a totally different agenda in life. It's the emergence of the sexual impulse. It's a statement about, the beginnings of differentiation, and demands a whole new system of social currency and development. You might even find you're the wrong sex, in terms of your identity and so on. Anorexia nervosa has its seedbed in those kinds of concerns. So, if you try to examine the question of why does it arise almost exclusively in females, then you inevitably get into the arena of discovering that concerns about shape, in the sense of feeling too fat, are almost exclusively female in adolescence. The tasks of adolescence, which are adjusting to puberty, tend to take some years. Some of us never complete them. Most of us probably never complete them. Most of us crystallize out some sort of solution to this problem, which stays with us for the rest of our lives and might imprint itself on our relationships, like the sort of person we engage with. So, in trying to understand why females get locked into the concern about shape, males get locked into their concern about shape in adolescence, but of course their concerns are quite different. They're to do with lean body mass. They're not to do with that element of their body which is changing in puberty under the influence of deposition of fat. I mean, males have major concerns about their body which have to do with lean body mass. I mean, basically you can see how biological it is. I mean, their concerns are with body building on the whole. But the female, very early on in adolescence, often becomes very concerned about that aspect of her body which is governed by the pubertal process, by the deposition of fat. And it is that concern which leads to calorie restriction, because the idea that you can regulate the amount of fat in your body by curbing calorie intake, energy intake, is sort of intuitive and natural, and it's always been known. I mean, God, if you like, has also arranged that at the end of puberty, when it's all in place, that will be a signal to the male, and you'll realize it is. Female shape, we're all, I presume there's nobody in this room who doesn't agree, determined by that fatness that we're talking about, is the thing that attracts the male. It's a social cue which indicates, in biological terms, readiness to reproduce when it's complete. So there's nothing new about that. That's not a whim of 20th century man. That's nature, I would suggest. What is essentially human about this dilemma is that human existence is not as simple as that. And so the experience of emerging sexuality, because that's the experiential aspect of this, of course, and all the challenges that go with that, get linked in to what is actually happening and get experienced as that fatness. And to the extent that it's ego dystonic, the individual will try to begin to regulate it.